She was hired to clean floors. But when her billionaire boss caught her studying medicine at 2 a.m., he uncovered a secret that would change both their lives forever. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The estate was still, cloaked in shadows except for a faint shaft of light coming from the kitchen. The grandfather clock in the hall had just chimed 2, a time when even the restless usually gave in to sleep. Graham Whitmore descended the staircase slowly, barefoot, a robe loosely wrapped over his pajamas. The quiet felt unnatural. Years ago, the home had echoed with laughter, soft piano melodies, and the rustling of pages as his wife read near the fireplace. Now it was silence and routine. Tea at 9, solitude by 10, insomnia after midnight. He didn't expect anyone else to be awake. Turning the corner into the kitchen, he paused. At the marble island, hunched over a stack of books, sat Lina Torres. She wore an oversized cardigan over her work uniform, sleeves pushed up, a pencil tucked behind her ear. Surrounding her were thick textbooks, a spiral notebook filled with notes, and anatomical diagrams drawn with care. She didn't notice him, completely absorbed in the world of biology and chemistry. Graham cleared his throat gently. Lina startled, quickly shutting her book. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore," she said, rising. "I didn't expect anyone to be up." He raised a hand. "No need to apologize. I just came down for water." "But what are you working on?" She hesitated, then looked down. "Studying. It's nearly 2 a.m., I know. But I have an exam tomorrow, a placement test for a remote course." He frowned slightly. "I wasn't aware you were taking classes." "I do them after work," she replied, brushing hair from her cheek. "Only at night. I can't afford school here yet, but if I pass, I could qualify for online study. It's a small chance, but I have to try." He glanced at the nearest book, Advanced Human Biology. "You want to be a nurse?" he asked. Lina lifted her eyes, and for the first time, he saw the spark that usually remained hidden behind her calm demeanor. "A doctor," she said quietly. Graham blinked. "I want to become a doctor," she repeated, her voice steadier now. "I've dreamed of it since I was little." He studied her more closely. She was maybe 28, small, thoughtful, efficient. She handled the chores of the house with precision and never lingered in conversation. But here she was, burning the midnight oil, chasing a dream that many would have let go of long ago. "Why?" he asked softly. She paused. "When I was 10, my father became very sick. We couldn't afford proper care. He passed away at home. I remember sitting beside him, feeling helpless. I promised myself I'd never feel like that again." Graham didn't reply at first. He just looked at her, really looked. She wasn't asking for pity. Her tone wasn't broken. Her expression wasn't pleading. She simply stood there, resilient, grounded, surrounded by tools she had gathered piece by piece for a future she refused to give up on. One she was shaping out of borrowed time, second-hand books, and fierce determination. "You must be exhausted," he said quietly. "I am," she admitted. "But still studying." "Yes." He gave a slight nod, like someone trying to process a truth he hadn't expected to find in his own kitchen. "Well," he said, reaching for a glass of water, "don't stop on my account." Lina looked at him, surprised. "Go ahead," Graham added, nodding toward her notebook. "You've got an exam to pass." Her lips parted slightly in surprise. Then, slowly, she nodded, sat back down, and reopened her textbook. As Graham turned to leave, he paused in the doorway and glanced back at her. This young woman with no luxury, no support, no assurances, only tenacity. And in that moment, something shifted. He no longer saw just the housekeeper who ironed his shirts and polished his silverware. He saw bravery. He saw fight. He saw the outline of a future still unwritten. And for the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest. Something that had been quiet since the day he buried his wife. Hope, admiration, and maybe, just maybe, a quiet flicker of inspiration. In the vast silence of his own home, Graham Whitmore realized the brightest glow wasn't from chandeliers or wealth, but from a dim kitchen lamp and the steady flame of a dreamer named Lina. Lina's days began long before sunrise and ended when most of the world had already gone still. By 5 a.m., she was up, preparing breakfast in the hushed kitchen, folding towels, restocking pantry shelves. By mid-morning, she moved through the long corridors of the estate, wiping windows, scrubbing tile floors, and buffing brass fixtures to a shine. She worked with quiet rhythm, always in motion, never idling. At lunch, she served dishes she didn't taste. In the afternoons, she tended the garden and dusted bookshelves in rooms she wasn't welcome to rest in. And at night, once the estate settled into stillness, she returned to her small room beside the laundry. Its furniture sparse, the bed creaky, the desk made from salvaged wood. That's where her second life began. Her textbooks were used, ordered online from out-of-state sellers. Her notes were scribbled on receipts, old flyers, and napkins saved from meals. Her only light was a cheap desk lamp that flickered whenever the heater kicked on. But still, she studied. She whispered complex medical terminology under her breath, careful not to disturb the sleeping house. She streamed hours of free lectures from a slow internet connection, often pausing and rewinding to catch every concept. Her signal lagged often, but she didn't complain. Frustration was a luxury she couldn't afford. Each night, she checked her phone at midnight. There was always something from home. A message from her younger sister, Rena, saying goodnight. A photo of their mom, thinner each week. A crayon drawing from her little brother, Tommy, showing Lina in a white coat with a cape. She saved those as her wallpaper, small reminders of why she kept going. She sent most of her paycheck back home, for medicine, school fees, and groceries. She kept only enough for instant noodles, soap, and a weekly bus pass. She rarely left the property. She hadn't bought clothes in years. Her shoes were patched. She cut her own hair. But none of that mattered. She had a mission. Her dream of becoming a doctor wasn't about prestige. It was about people like her father, who passed away on a rickety mattress in their village, sweating through a fever they couldn't afford to treat. It was about mothers who gave birth too late because no clinics were nearby. It was about giving kids like Tommy a better answer than "we can't afford it." People told her it was a fantasy that no one like her, dark-skinned, broke, a housemaid in a foreign country, could ever wear a white coat. But Lina didn't argue. She just kept working. Even on her hardest days, when her hands throbbed from scrubbing or her eyes stung from exhaustion, she never let the fire inside her go out. And Graham noticed. He didn't say anything, not yet. But he noticed the way she moved with intention. The way she glanced at her books when no one was looking. The way she touched everything, furniture, walls, garden tools, with gentleness, as if the world still deserved care even if it didn't offer it back. Lina never asked for more, not time, not help, not thanks. She didn't believe in shortcuts. She believed in the work. And she did it quietly, persistently, without apology. One night, while sitting at her desk, reviewing symptoms for a practice diagnostic test, she looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "I'll make it. Even if it takes forever, I'll get there." She didn't know if anyone heard, but someone had. For the first time in his 52 years, Graham Whitmore felt that maybe real strength didn't come from commanding boardrooms or building empires. Sometimes it wore a cleaning apron during the day, a pencil in its hair at night, and carried the weight of a dream no one else believed in. It all began with a second glance. At first, he had observed Lina from afar, politely, the way wealthy people often observed those who served them. But something shifted after that night in the kitchen. After seeing her immersed in medical diagrams, her eyes fierce with determination, he couldn't stop noticing her. More and more, he saw the care in her movements, how she gently pruned the garden's lavender bushes as if they were fragile creatures. How she wrapped a towel around the hot kettle handle so the cook wouldn't burn himself. How she left a bowl of ginger soup by the butler's door when he looked unwell without ever attaching her name to it. She spoke little, but in her quiet, she conveyed something few people in Graham's orbit ever did: awareness. Kindness not for show, but instinct. He started asking her small questions when they crossed paths. "How long have you worked here?" "3 years, Mr. Whitmore." "And before that?" "Private homes." "Always live in?" "It helps me save more." Her answers were short, respectful. She never lingered, never assumed, but always answered truthfully. And it was that truth, plain, free of artifice, that moved him. One evening, while Graham sipped tea on the patio, he saw Lina returning from the market. She paused near the gardener, who was kneeling by the rose beds, and handed him a small jar. "You said your knees hurt last week," she said softly before disappearing inside. Graham said nothing, but something settled in him, quiet and deep. The next evening, while passing the corridor near the study, he spotted Lina sitting just outside the service wing, reading again. She looked up, startled, and began to rise. "No need," he said gently. "Mind if I sit with you?" Her eyes widened. "Here." I like the quiet, he replied, lowering himself into the chair opposite hers. She hesitated, then sat back down. I can stop if you'd prefer silence. Please don't, he said. She opened her book again, her fingers slightly trembling. A few moments passed in companionable silence. Then, softly, he asked, Do you miss Riverside? She paused. Every single day. Why not go back? She didn't lift her head. Because everything I need to become is still here. They didn't speak much more that night, but something passed between them, an invisible thread of understanding. It became a ritual. A few evenings later, Graham appeared with 2 mugs of coffee. This one's sweet, he said, handing one to her. I wasn't sure how you take it. She smiled gently. Sweet is perfect. Thank you. They sipped in silence. Another evening, he asked about her family. She told him about her mother, still recovering from a stroke, and her younger siblings, how she sent money home each week to cover medicine and tuition. How she once dreamed of being a teacher before her father's illness shifted her path. He died of a lung infection, she said quietly. There was no clinic nearby. By the time we got to one, it was too late. Graham's hands tightened slightly around his mug. After a pause, he spoke. My wife used to teach underprivileged kids on weekends, rain or shine. Lina looked up. She passed away from cancer, he added. Aggressive. Quick. 1 month she was laughing at my bad piano playing, then she was gone. Lina lowered her eyes. I'm so sorry. He gave a faint shake of his head. I've never told anyone that in this house. They sat quietly after that, no masks, no roles. Just 2 people who understood what it meant to lose someone and to keep going anyway. After that, their evening meetings became a rhythm, soft and slow. Some nights they spoke of biology and medicine, some of memories and music. Other nights they simply sat in silence, no longer awkward, but peaceful. Graham found himself waiting for those moments, anticipating them. They weren't dramatic, but in Lina's presence, measured, grounded, quietly strong. Something in him began to thaw. He smiled more, chuckled at little things again. One morning, he caught himself humming a tune he hadn't thought of in years. And one evening, when Lina handed him a mug of chamomile tea and their fingers brushed for a second, he felt it. Something he hadn't known he was still capable of. Not necessarily desire, but life. A warmth that didn't roar like fire, but glowed slow and steady. And for the first time since the loss of his wife, Graham Whitmore realized that his heart, hidden away for so long, was still able to feel something real. It began with a single phone call. Graham sat in his home office one morning, sunlight spilling across polished wood and ignored reports. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in a long time. Dr. Myers, he said when the voice answered. I need a favor. A week later, Lina was summoned, not to the kitchen, not to the garden, but to the library, a place rarely used for staff. She entered nervously, wiping her hands on her apron. Sir? Graham didn't look up at first. There's a hospital I've supported for over a decade, Northbridge Medical Center. They have a community program on Saturdays. I arranged for you to volunteer. Her eyes widened. Volunteer? At a real hospital? He nodded. You'll shadow nurses, assist with non-critical tasks, observe. Just a few hours a week. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Think of it as practice, he added, finally looking at her. For the future. Her throat tightened. Thank you, she whispered. I'll work hard. I promise. He gave her a quiet smile. I know you will. That Saturday, Lina arrived at Northbridge Medical just after dawn. Wearing her plainest clothes, her hair tied back neatly, her heart racing. She was introduced to a nurse named Brenda, who gave her a quick orientation and placed her in the outpatient clinic. Lina didn't hesitate. She helped elderly patients fill out forms, took blood pressure readings, translated where she could, and soothed crying children with gentle words and soft smiles. She cleaned between appointments and paid close attention to everything. By the end of her shift, Brenda approached her. You said this is your first time in a hospital? Lina nodded, worried she'd done something wrong. You've got better bedside instincts than some interns. Lina blinked. I just helped the way I'd want someone to help my family. Brenda looked at her for a second, then nodded. Same time next week? From that day forward, Lina returned every Saturday, always early, always ready. She asked questions carefully, scribbled in her battered notebook, stayed longer than scheduled. The staff began to remember her. Some doctors even sought her input, not as a test, but out of respect. She noticed details others missed. Back at the estate, Graham didn't press. He didn't ask for reports or updates. But each Saturday night, a cup of warm tea would be waiting outside her door, no note, just silent support. Then, one Thursday afternoon, he called her into the library again. This time, a folder waited on the desk. Lina stepped inside, cautious. Is something wrong? He gestured to the chair. Quite the opposite. She sat, confused. He slid the folder toward her. Inside was a letter, an official acceptance from the Brymark Healthcare Fellowship, a prestigious program tied to one of his foundations. A full scholarship. 2 years of pre-med. Guaranteed admission into Hudson Valley Medical University if she passed. Her hands trembled. I didn't apply for this. You didn't have to, he said. I did. Lina stared at the letter, the gold seal at the top, her name typed in bold. A full scholarship, she whispered. But why? Graham met her gaze, calm and sincere. Because I see who you are and who you're becoming. Tears welled in her eyes. You work harder than anyone I've met. You've taught yourself more than some students with every privilege, and you care deeply. That can't be taught, but it can be supported. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. You don't owe me anything, he added. This isn't charity. It's recognition. You earned that letter. I just made sure someone saw it. She shook her head, a housekeeper. No, he said softly. You're a future doctor. The world just needs to catch up. That night, for the first time in months, Lina didn't study. She sat in her room holding the letter, tracing the embossed seal with her finger, reading the words again and again until she could recite them from memory. All her life, she'd fought for inches, for moments to learn, for books to borrow, for a dream no one thought she deserved. And now this. A real classroom. Professors. Lab time. Books she didn't have to borrow. A future. But the golden seal came with a weight she couldn't ignore. She pulled out an envelope, flipped it over, and began scribbling numbers with a calculator. Yes, tuition was covered, but her family's bills weren't. Her mother's medication, Rena's school fees, Tommy's clothes. Every dollar she earned was already spoken for. If she left the estate to study full-time, that lifeline vanished. She dropped her head into her hands. Could she really abandon the only income they had just to chase a dream that still felt distant? The next morning, Lina asked to speak with Graham. He invited her into the conservatory, a peaceful room filled with orchids and sunlight. She stood stiffly, the letter clenched in her hands. I don't think I can go, she said, her voice low. Not right now. Graham looked up from pouring tea. Why not? I send money home every week. My mom needs her meds. My siblings are still in school. If I stop working, they'll have nothing. I can't be selfish. He set the teapot down. Lina, what you call selfish, I call brave. She shook her head. They need me more than the world needs another doctor. He stood, walked over, and gently touched the letter between her fingers. You've spent your entire life giving. And that's beautiful. But if you give up your dream just to survive, you'll keep surviving and never truly live. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm not saying to abandon them, he said. But maybe it's time someone else carried the weight for a while. Maybe it's time you stepped into who you were meant to be. She stared at him, shaking. No one's ever said that to me before. I mean it. Silence settled between them like falling dust. Then Lina slowly lowered herself into the chair across from him. Her grip on the letter loosened. Her shoulders sagged, not from defeat, but release. I'm scared, she admitted. I know, Graham said softly. That's how you know it matters. Lina looked out through the glass, where morning light touched the garden beyond. She thought of her father, coughing through the night. Her mother, waiting for medication. Her sister, drawing pictures of Lina in a lab coat. Her brother, full of wide-eyed questions. And then she thought of herself. Not the version scrubbing floors, but the one who could heal. Could build. Could lead. Finally, she nodded. I'll do it. Graham let out a quiet breath. A small smile touched his lips. Then the world just became a little luckier. She laughed through tears, part disbelief, part joy. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, he said. Just become who you already are. That night, Lina began to pack, not with fear, but with resolve. She wasn't abandoning her family, she was stepping forward for them. The first day of the Brymark program felt like arriving in a foreign land. Lina stood in front of the campus building, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a folder clutched to her chest. All around her, students emerged from sleek cars, wearing designer coats, noise-canceling headphones, and chatting about vacations and internships. She pulled her thrifted sweater closer, feeling its frayed cuffs as if they glowed. She walked through the glass doors with her head down, scholarship ID clutched like a lifeline. In her first anatomy lab, she didn't speak. She listened, wrote everything down, nodded when addressed. She didn't laugh at the professor's jokes. She was too focused. No one asked her name. A few nodded politely. Most didn't notice her. But Lina noticed everything. She memorized every term, reviewed notes each night, and practiced alone with flashcards and online simulations. Always first to arrive, last to leave, quiet, invisible, but relentless. Until one afternoon during a group case study, the instructor posed a tough diagnostic question. The class hesitated, uncertain. Lina raised her hand, steady, but soft. The symptoms match a variant of hyper-IgE syndrome, she said. Job syndrome. We studied it last week. The room went still. The instructor blinked. Correct. From that moment on, something shifted. The murmurs changed. Curiosity replaced dismissal. Who was she? Where did she learn to think like that? Lina never gave long answers. She simply kept showing up. Prepared, humble, sharp. Every month, she wrote to Graham. Not emails, but handwritten letters, folded neatly in envelopes. She shared updates. Classes, tests, little triumphs. She thanked him in every one. He never replied, but he read every word. Each letter was pinned to a corkboard in his study, like sacred notes. Evidence of a story he'd helped ignite, and a quiet reminder that his life, once structured, sterile, had played a part in creating something good. One evening, Graham's assistant walked into his study, noticed the wall of letters, and asked, "Are these from your niece?" He smiled faintly. Something like that. Meanwhile, Lina continued to thrive. She received top scores, earned praise from professors, and was invited to join research groups. She also became a mentor in a program for first-generation students, offering tutoring and guidance to those just beginning the journey she had once feared. And slowly, something changed. Not in her surroundings, but in her. She started to walk with purpose. She raised her hand more in class. She met her professor's eyes. She stopped apologizing when she spoke. It wasn't arrogance. It was arrival. She had once whispered her dream into the silence of a laundry room. Now she stood beneath fluorescent lights and spoke about medicine, equity, and compassion with clarity and strength. One afternoon, Lina caught a glimpse of herself in the campus library's mirror, hair pulled back neatly, white coat folded over her arm, a stack of textbooks against her chest. She didn't look like a housekeeper anymore. She looked like someone who knew she belonged. And while Graham never once mentioned the letters decorating his wall, he continued reading each one like scripture. In his quiet, echoing home, once filled only with silence and memory, there was now a steady, invisible presence. The knowledge that somewhere Lina was becoming exactly who she was meant to be. Not because of him, but because someone once believed. The car pulled into the long gravel driveway, the tires crackling softly over stone. The estate looked nearly the same. White columns. Gleaming windows. The familiar stretch of blooming roses along the path. But Lina had changed completely. She stepped out slowly, adjusting the collar of her blazer, and took a breath. For years since she had walked this path with a mop in one hand and a packed lunch in the other. For years since she quietly scrubbed glass, served meals, and whispered medical terms into the night. Now she returned as a graduate of Hudson Valley Medical, a doctor in training. A woman shaped by discipline, grief, and unwavering hope. She rang the bell. The door opened. There he was. Graham Whitmore, a little grayer now, lines deeper around his eyes. But still watchful. Warm. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he smiled. "Lina," he said, his voice quieter than she remembered. She smiled back. "Hello, Mr. Whitmore?" "No more, sir." She shook her head with a small laugh. "Not today." He stepped aside. "Come in." She stepped into the house she once scrubbed top to bottom, but saw it differently now. Not as a place of servitude, but as the quiet witness of her transformation. They walked together down the hallway, past familiar paintings and polished wood, into the conservatory. Sunlight spilled across the tiled floor. Graham poured the tea without asking, just as he used to, and handed her a cup. They sat in silence for a while. Comfortable. Familiar. Finally, he said, "I kept all your letters." Lina looked up. "They're still on the wall," he added, voice distant. "When the house feels too quiet, I read them again." Her throat tightened. "I never knew if you read them." He chuckled. "Every single one. Twice." She smiled, eyes soft. "Thank you for everything. I wouldn't have made it without your belief." "You made it," he said, "because you refused not to." Then came stories about classes, late-night study sessions, her first patient, the hospital where she'd begin her residency. Graham listened, his hands wrapped around the warm mug, nodding gently. Then he asked, "Do you ever regret leaving?" Lina was quiet for a moment, then slowly shook her head. No, she said, because what I found on the way back was me. He nodded deeply, as if those words filled something inside him he hadn't realized was empty. The sun dipped low, washing the conservatory in amber light. They sat in that quiet glow, not as billionaire and housekeeper, not as benefactor and student, but as something else, something harder to name but very real. And in that quiet, something passed between them. Not romantic promises, not declarations, but a shared knowing of all they had endured, of all they had become, and the possibility of all that still lay ahead. Later, in a grand auditorium filled with applause, Lina stood at the podium in her graduation gown. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the speech she had rewritten a dozen times. Her white coat now bore her name embroidered in clean black script, Dr. Lina Torres. Her heart wasn't racing with fear anymore, but with calm certainty. She looked out at the crowd. Proud families, beaming classmates, professors and mentors. And near the back, hidden in shadows but unmistakably present, sat Graham. He didn't wave, didn't stand, but he was there. She leaned into the microphone. I wasn't born into privilege, she began. I was born in a home where dreams cost more than we had. A hush fell across the auditorium. I watched illness take the people I loved. Not because there weren't cures, but because we couldn't reach them. For a long time, I believed survival was the goal. She paused, steadying her voice. But one day, someone saw me. Not for what I was doing, not for where I came from, but for who I could become. She smiled gently. There was a man who saw me not as a housekeeper, but as a story waiting to unfold. And he gave me something priceless, belief. The crowd murmured, but Lina held her gaze. That belief changed everything. Today, I stand here not only as a doctor, but as proof that compassion can grow into something extraordinary. The standing ovation lasted minutes, but Lina barely heard it. Her eyes had already found Graham, still seated, still quiet, but smiling. A slow, proud smile that reached his eyes. Months later, Lina opened her first community clinic. It was a modest space tucked into a corner of Brooklyn, just off a busy street. 5 small rooms. A waiting area with hand-me-down chairs. A mural painted by neighborhood kids sprawled across the side wall, vibrant, hopeful. It wasn't fancy, but it was full. Of patients, of volunteers, of purpose. She offered basic checkups for undocumented families, prenatal care for mothers without insurance, vaccines for children who had fallen through the cracks. Her staff was small, her budget even smaller, but her doors never closed. She named the clinic the Haven Center, a tribute to the idea that healing didn't always require wealth, only a place to begin. No donor names were on the plaque, but Lina knew who had quietly funded the equipment, who covered rent, who sent monthly donations through anonymous channels. She thanked him often, through voicemails, through letters, through handwritten cards tucked into clinic mailings. He never replied, but he never stopped giving. One golden autumn afternoon, Lina invited him to visit. He arrived near closing, wearing a simple coat, moving slower now, thinner, quieter, but still watching everything with that calm gaze. They sat on a bench outside the clinic, watching children draw suns and stick figures with sidewalk chalk. Neither spoke for a while. Then Lina said, "They think this place is magic." Graham raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" She smiled. "In a way. It was built on something stronger than concrete." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached out and gently took her hand. For just a moment, he held it. No words, no gestures, just stillness. And in his eyes, she saw it all. That he had never stopped believing in her. That he had never expected anything in return. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. The children laughed louder. The mural caught the last rays of sunlight. And 2 people, once strangers in a kitchen lit by a flickering bulb, sat side by side, quietly taking in the life they'd helped build in different ways for the same reason. Because some stories don't end in love. Some begin with it and simply keep growing.